we're going to talk about different ways that we as a church reach out. What it is we need to do to be a people who follow the Great Commission, whether it be in our families, whether it be in our neighborhoods, whether it be at work and school, whether it be our worldwide mission. And so I want us to think about that aspect of reaching out. We have memorized as a child the Great Commission passages, right? Mark 16:15, go preach the gospel to every creature. He who believes and is baptized shall be saved. He who does not believe shall be condemned. Matthew 28, beginning of verse 18, all authority in heaven and earth, Jesus says, has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them all things that I have commanded you. Acts 1:8, you shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the earth. And so we know those passages, and there's several more, but a lot of times we know them in theory, we know them in concept, but we don't know how to actually do it in regular life. What is it that God's asking us to do? What is it God's calling us to do as Christians? And so to introduce that subject and to introduce the idea of saving ourselves before we save someone else, we're going to go to John 4. Now, as you get to John 4, let's go ahead and go to our first slide. We see this idea of reaching up to the source. That's in verse 7 through 10. Now, a little bit earlier, you're going to notice something. It's in verse 4. He had to go through, or had to go to Samaria. Now, notice where we are as we're working through the book of John. In John 1, we see the identity. In the beginning was the Word was with God. He tabernacled with men, chapter 1 and verse 14. In chapter 2, we see where his mission begins as his mother comes to him and as the people come to him and they ask him to do his very first miracle, changing water to wine. In chapter 3, we see where a man comes at night, comes to him, Nicodemus, and says, we know that you're a man of God. No man could do the things that you do unless God be with him. And we see that conversation about the identity of Jesus throughout chapter 3. We see John 3:16, God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. We see in 17, Jesus came to this earth not to condemn the world, but that through him he might save the world. And so imagine, if you were the Son of God, come from heaven to this earth. If God had sent you with a mission to redeem mankind, who would be the very first person that you would go to? Yes, he went to the temple when he was the age 12. That wasn't his mission necessarily. Yes, we see in chapter 1 and also chapter 2, Andrew and Peter and Nicodemus came to him. But who's the very first person he goes to see? Well, it says he had to go to or through Samaria. This is a question of geography. It's not a question of geography, it's a question of mission. You see, most Jews went around Samaria because Samaritans in their mind were dirty people. They worshipped a different god. They worshipped in a wrong way. They could make holy people unclean by being around them. And so Jews generally would go away. But not Jesus. Jesus, of all the people that he could pick to begin his mission of bringing the lost to himself, of all the places he would go, decided to go to Jacob's well in Samaria. And so he goes to Jacob's well, and as he's traveling through Samaria, they stop there, and he just happens to be hungry at the time of noon, happens to be there at that certain time, and they find out, of course, hey, we have no food. Now, I have 5 boys. I've more or less raised 4 of them. And let me tell you a concept that I've discovered. The more people you send somewhere to get food, the more money you'll spend. I can send one boy and say, okay, go pick up some chicken or something, and they'll go and pick up the chicken. You send 2 boys, they go pick up the chicken, plus they need to get some drinks, right? You send 3, now we have chicken, now we have drinks, and we might get a burger because somebody doesn't like chicken. You send 4, you might as well buy the whole store. And that's kind of how that works. Well, you could send 1 or 2 of your apostles to go get food, but that's not how Jesus does it. All 12 are sent to go and get food, and Jesus is left there alone. And so what I hope you're noticing as we open up here in John 4, These things look like happenstance. Oh, I've got to go through Samaria. Oh, we ended up right here. Oh, what do you know? It's noon. And oh, what do you know? I'm all by myself. It looks like happenstance. But God is on a mission. Jesus knows that there's going to be a lady coming right about at this moment. Jesus knows who this person is and what's about to happen. Jesus knows that this person needs to meet God, that this lady needs to have an encounter with Jesus, and she knows that by speaking to her, the entire city of Sychar is going to hear the gospel, one of the first cities actually to hear it and to accept Jesus. Now, noticing that concept there in John 4, think about your life. How was it that you were brought to know the gospel? 7 billion people on this earth. God decided to stick you in the family where you're at. And you might say, I don't know if I would have picked this family. God picked this family for you. And maybe perhaps with that family you heard about Jesus. All the people in the world, all the places you could work, maybe somebody you worked alongside loved you enough to share the gospel with you. And because of that, you grew to love Jesus and to live for Jesus. You see, Esther 4:14 says God places us at certain times and certain places for his will to be done. And there's times where God will insert us into a situation and he will expect us to act like Christians. And so Jesus has placed himself here, and he knows this lady is going to come, and he knows, okay, here is an opportunity to spread the gospel. And while all these things look like coincidences, he has allowed this lady to reach the source. But then we see barriers. Verse 9. Jesus, speaking to this woman, opening up the conversation, says, lady, ma'am, woman, give me a drink. The lady looks at him and says, that's not how we do things. Verse 9, excuse me, you're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan. We don't talk. And a lot of times people will point out, Jew, Samaritan, man, woman, not married. In this culture, they did not talk because there might be rumors and things such as that. This is a woman who's been married multiple times, and a holy man, a rabbi. There's so many barriers that are here. This lady says, you can't talk to me because by talking to me, you're breaking the rules. Jews and Samaritans, we don't talk. We're not allowed to share back and forth like you're trying to do. Bring that to us today. How many times do we find barriers in our life? Well, I would invite that person to church, but they've got a history. I would tell people about Jesus, but I just don't know him that well. Or maybe I know him so well I'm going to offend him. Or, I would tell them about Jesus, but I'm really busy right now. And if we took a step back and looked at it, we'd see all the different ways that Satan is putting a barrier. He sees us and says, oh no, he might tell somebody about Jesus. Let me put this barrier here. Let me put this problem here, whether it be a society problem, whether it be our busyness, whether it be our judgment on other people. There always seems to be a reason Satan puts on us to where we shouldn't have a conversation about Jesus. To where we think, maybe I should, but I'll get around to it at a later time because the time is just not right. The time is just not there. And so the lady there in verse 9, she says, there's a barrier here. We don't need to have this conversation. Even though God had put his son on this earth, even though Jesus had placed himself at the well by himself, and even though Jesus had begun the conversation, she still had barriers, and she was still looking for excuses, and she was still looking for a way out. Now, how about us? What barriers do we have? Remember Acts chapter 10, verse 30, 34? Peter there says, after he has been forced more or less by the Lord to go speak to Cornelius, he says, you know what? God's not a respecter of persons. But God longs for all people everywhere to call on his name. God wants people to hear about Jesus. God is not going to respect barriers. God wants us to go and preach the gospel to every single person. Even those people that we think are not worthy or who will not listen. Paul tells us, Romans 5:8, that even while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And so as this lady is coming up with different excuses and different things, notice what Jesus says here in verse 10. He said, ma'am, if you knew to whom you were talking, if you knew this opportunity that you have, you would have come to me and you would have asked for living water. You would have seen that life is beyond the physical. Life is beyond the busyness that we have. And there is something so much more important. Something that matters so much more. And that is the living water. And so what I want us to invite ourselves to do today is to think about living water more than we think about physical water. Think about our spiritual opportunity more than we do of the busyness and the stress of life that goes on day after day after day. In your life, are you searching for that living water? Are you willing to share that living water with those who are lost and those who are thirsty and those who need it? So we reach to the source. Now we start in verse 11, and we see we reach out to the needs. The need which people have. I want us to notice this lady, as she has her conversation with Jesus, the barriers she throws up. One after the other, after the other, after the other. And it's interesting to see how here she is in the face of Jesus, in the presence of Jesus, and she keeps saying, I would listen to you, but... And then, okay, I would listen to you then, but there's this else. And it goes on and on and on. You know, we say it goes back to Einstein, the saying does. I don't think it does. But the saying is, what is the definition of insanity? It's doing the same thing over and over and over. You see, 2 + 2 = 4. And you can add 2 and 2 over and over and over and pray that it doesn't equal 4 and hope that this time it doesn't equal 4 and say maybe eventually it won't equal 4. But if the numbers are true, the result's always going to be the same. And what you see here is a woman who has gone through and tried many, many, many different things to find satisfaction. She's tried many different ways, and yet here she is by herself at noon when nobody else is there, getting water because what she's doing absolutely does not work. Notice some of these excuses. You promised me living water, verse 11. You don't even have a cup. You don't even have a bucket. You promised living water and you can't get it. Sounds like a woman who has listened to too many men. Married over and over and over. And she's heard promises that I will love you, I will be with you forever, that this is your perfect opportunity. And these men who have promised great things have failed every single time. And she says, I can see through you. I can see. You promised living water. You don't even have a bucket. This is not going to happen. Verse 12. Oh, you think you're greater than Jacob who dug this well. You're not who you say you are, she says. I hear you, but I know really how people are. I have been let down. I have been dropped. I have been cheated against and hurt. I know that you're not who you say you are, and you're not a half as good as you think you are. Verse 12. You're not greater than our father Jacob. When Jesus says, well, go get your husband. And she says, well, I have no husband. And he says, right, have you said you've had 5 husbands? The man you're with right now is not your husband. And so the barriers begin to drop, but she still has some. Where do you go? Time for the religious conversation. Verse 19. Well, okay, all right, you're a prophet. So us Samaritans, we're over here on Mount Gerizim. You say Jerusalem. this is a long, protracted debate people would have back and forth, and we can go into the Samaritan religion and see where they said that Moses delivered the 10 Commandments there on Gerizim, which he didn't, that Elijah was there, which he wasn't, when he fought the 400 prophets of Baal. They had all sorts of things. But this woman knew, okay, you start this conversation, and we will be here a long time, and we'll be distracted. You find a religious person and you don't like where the conversation's going, just bring up some controversial doctrine, and instead of picking on you, they'll chase whatever that doctrine is. That's what she's doing. And so Jesus goes through and he tells her, God is spirit. Those who worship will worship in spirit and truth. In other words, you need to get right with God. Final, verse 25. Okay, prophet. Okay, man who seems to know who I am. You say this, but we'll hold it off till later. Verse 25, when the Messiah comes, then he'll tell us everything. You know, in the future, we're going to get this taken care of. You ever hear anybody say that? And Jesus says, I who speak to you am he. Now, in your life, I know in my life, but in your life, what have you tried to find fulfillment from? What is it that you seek that will truly make you you? What is it that you lay awake at night thinking about? What is it that you plan for your future? What is it that fills your heart and your mind? For some people, it's relationships. Someday, maybe we'll get married. Someday, maybe we'll have a child. Someday, my family will be what it ought to be. Some people try to find fulfillment in traditions, even religion. And yet religion without God is not filling. It's nothing more than junk food. It may give us a feeling for a second, but it leaves us hungry. Sometimes people say, well, it's personal religion. I can get as close to God on the lake as I can in the church building. Well, okay, you have your church, but I pray to God and we've worked it out together. There's no other name by which we must be saved than that of Jesus Christ. There's no other way to find salvation than through the Lord. John 14 and verse 6. And so the question here, given to this woman and given to me and you, is, are you ready to try Jesus? Jesus is sitting in front of her, sitting at the well, and Jesus, figuratively, is sitting right in front of us. And he's saying, you've tried all these excuses. You tried all these different things. Are you now ready for Jesus? Will you now truly go the way you should? He's greater than Jacob. He is the living water, and he is the eternal fountain. Every definition of satisfaction is found in Jesus. And until you and I decide that it's Jesus that we will seek first, Matthew 6:33. Until you and I decide that we will humble ourselves as a living sacrifice, Romans 12 and verse 1. Until you and I decide that whatever we do, whether it be in word or deed, we're going to do it in the name of Jesus, we're going to be left hungry. We're going to be left rejected and will not be with the Lord. Now we'll skip down all the way to verse 39. 27 to 39 is our next one. And here we see the aspect of reaching out to others. The disciples come back in 27. They've got food. Of course, there's 12 of them. That means they have the chicken and the burgers and everything else, because that's what people do when there's a lot of them in the store. They come back and they're like, whoa, here's our rabbi, and she is talking to a Samaritan woman. Jesus, have you forgotten the rules? Jesus, you got issues here. And what I love about this is here you see the people are, in 3 years, they're going to be preaching the gospel to the whole world. You see how immature they are early in the ministry. They're like, I'm not talking to that person. I'm not going to that person and having a conversation with them. Jesus, what in the world? We got to get over to Galilee. We got to get to Jerusalem. There are Samaritans around here. Why are you talking to that woman? those barriers come up once again. Now let me tell you a secret about the church. Many times, long-time church members are the least evangelistic people in the entire church. It's sad, but sometimes it's true. A person who comes to church a long time, they have their assigned pew and nobody else is allowed to be there. The person who's been there a long time, someone will come forward at the invitation and they're like, oh man, I'm going to be late. Somebody who's been there a long time wants a church that does not have troubled people. Wants everybody to be perfect, and if they're not perfect, he wants them to look perfect so you don't have to deal with issues. These apostles are saying, Jesus, don't talk to her. We've got more important things. We've got better things to do. We've got better places to go. But while they're talking to Jesus, look there in verse 29 through 30, what's happened. We don't even see the woman leave, but she obviously left. And as she leaves, she goes and she tells her city, you got to come with me. I've just met a man who's told me everything about me. She doesn't have a full understanding, but she's going to share what she knows. And even though this woman has been married multiple times, even though this woman is looking for privacy by coming at noon, she has influence, and the entire city of Sychar is coming across the field. And you can imagine those white turbans that people wore back then. And you can imagine it's getting close to the barley harvest, and barley, as it ripens, will turn white at the top. And Jesus said, look at the fields. These fields are ready for harvest. He's not talking about the barley. He says, look at all these people. Pray to the Lord that he will raise up people that will take advantage of this harvest. And that command for prayer is not just to the apostles. It's even to you and I. She comes back and she brings the city. Now, we can be the busiest church. We can be the most programmed church. We can be the church that meets the most times. But the important thing is that we're showing Jesus to our community. The important thing is that each and every one of us sees the importance of going back to our city, our Sychar, and bringing someone to Jesus. Once she had the living water, she decided she needed to share it. Now, in closing, let's go to our last slide. What I want you to see is that's our sermon outline, the source, the needs, the others. But I want us to see that if we're going to reach out to the world, the very first place we've got to start is us. Your greatest mission field is not Africa, it's not Russia, it's not South America. Your greatest mission field is not Montana, it's not even Benton, Kentucky. The first mission field you've got to work on is right here in your heart. Right with who you are. Going back to those apostles again, okay? Those apostles are looking at the Samaritan woman and saying, Jesus, we cannot talk to this kind of person. Fast forward 3 years. You've got some which are going to India, some which are going to Iran, some which are going up to Turkey, some which are going down to Egypt. We see that their heart changed. And this relationship they had with Jesus caused their mission field in their heart to see that they needed to share the living water. And for us as a congregation, and more specifically for us as Christians, one of the reasons why we're not evangelistic, one of the reasons why we don't invite somebody to church, one of the reasons why we don't talk about Jesus is not the weakness of a church or the weakness of Jesus. It's in our heart. We don't truly understand the concept of living water. We don't truly understand that he is the eternal fountain. And we don't understand the importance of sharing what we have. And so as you read in John chapter 4, what I want us to notice is that Jesus put himself in a very specific time, in a very specific place to reach this woman. And by reaching this woman, he reached the world. As we bring that to today, Jesus has brought us to a very specific time and a very specific place. What's your reaction? Is your heart truly given to Jesus? Are you partaking of the living water? And are you willing to share with other people?